I would defend the right of that movie to show in theaters. I would not defend the material. I was asked several years ago to defend the American Nazi Party, and I made the line very clear in my discussions with them. Your right to do it is defended, but not the material at issue.
Hey guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'm Jerry, and one of my more regular commenters tipped me off onto something because I posted a meme on my YouTube, and I just wanted to put these two things together. These three things together, and this commenter was like, "Do you remember when Alan Dershowitz defended snuff films?" I was like, wait, what? I'm going to dig into that. And I already found the file by the time I got back to noticing that they had responded to me. The American Archive of Public Broadcasting, a collaboration between the Library of Congress, and GBH, which is actually radio station WGBH out of Boston. This is on their First Amendment series. We're gonna listen to this. It's about a half hour long, and then I've got a few things I want to show scattered through, and then I have a follow-up video on the back end of this that I want to share. So, when was this made? All right, series description. The First Amendment is a weekly talk show hosted by Dr. Bernard Rubin, the director of the Institute for Democratic Communications at Boston University. Each episode features a conversation that examines civil liberties and the media in the 1970s. So this is from March 3rd, 1977. It's a talk show, social issues. 28 minutes, 52 seconds. Production organization, WGBH, Education Foundation. AAPB Contributor Holdings. WGBH with that identifier. It's on a 1/4-inch audio tape and was generated with a master. Citations: Chicago, the First Amendment, Alan Dershowitz. MLA, First Amendment, Alan Dershowitz. And the APA, the First Amendment, Alan Dershowitz. So there's all the credentials. All my references, all my materials will be linked in the description below the video. So let's go ahead and get into this. Oh, by the way, when we get to this point about talking about a little more deeply on translations of the First Amendment, I'll throw that back up there just for further reference to back up the audio. And like I said, I've got a few tabs to share back and forth on the way through this. Just food for thought. But I'm going to mute myself and get this thing going.
WGBH Boston, in cooperation with the Institute for Democratic Communications at the School of Communications at Boston University, now presents the First Amendment and a Free People, an examination of civil liberties and the media in the 1970s. And now here is the director of the Institute for Democratic Communication, Dr. Bernard Rubin.
Our subject today is to go around the problem of what constitutes obscenity in print and the rest of the media, movies and so on, and whether anybody can find some definition or some working arrangement so that we could look at cases like the recent case of Mr. Harry Reams, who was convicted for being an actor in what was deemed a pornographic movie, or the case of Larry Flint, who was convicted and given 7 to 25 years and an $11,000 fine as the publisher of Hustler magazine, and similar cases. This obscenity problem is one of the deep-running ones that concerns us at all times. I have as my guest today Professor Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor, an active participant in civil rights cases. He's been Harry Reams' lawyer. He writes extensively about civil liberties. been involved in such cases as the Pentagon Papers situation and the Titicut Follies movie. Recently, he commented on as Mr. Ream's lawyer, and said, any person who participates in any way in the creation, production, editing, or distribution of a sexually explicit film, newspaper, book, painting, or magazine can be hauled into a federal court anywhere in the United States and charged with participating in a national conspiracy. My other guest is Carol Rivers, the well-known journalist and professor at Boston University. I'm going to ask this question of you, Alan Dershowitz, right at the start. Is there anything in your mind, in print or through the movies or whatnot, that is to be accepted as obscene or pornographic under the First Amendment?
Yes, depending on where it's displayed and how it's displayed. I'm an absolutist when it comes to the inside of a book or the inside of a movie theater. I think it's none of the state's business to peek in and to check what's playing in movie theaters or to start thumbing through the insides of a magazine or a book. But I feel very strongly, equally strongly, that the state has a reasonable interest in making sure that the covers of magazines are not displayed so as to offend unwilling readers. I'm very strongly of the view that the society has the right to make sure that the marquee of theaters are not such as to offend people who pass by and cannot control where their eyes hit. I have come up with what I call the theory of externality. I think the society has a legitimate right to protect the prude as well as the pervert. That is, if somebody doesn't want to see obscenity, he has just as much of a right not to see it as the person who wants to see obscenity has the right to see it. And therefore, what we have to do is come up with zones of privacy. And the
Zones of privacy. Is that like safe places for perverts?
zone of privacy for the reader is the inside of the book or the theater, and the zone of privacy for the rest of the citizenry is the outside of the theater and the outside of the book. So I think you can come up with definitions so long.
So apparently this is how pornography started getting sold and mailed in plain packaging, or in some sort of packaging that would cover up the cover except for maybe the title of the magazine.
As those definitions are limited to the
You know,
externalities.
before I ask Carol to question you, I'd like to ask one more, and that is your zones, do they differ from the Supreme Court's standard, one of the standards set in Miller versus California of 1973, which talked about the prevailing community standard, whatever that means?
Well, there is a big difference because
Hang on. I just realized. I wonder if this is why my high school speech and drama teacher, Mr. Mitchell, had us debate. It was Lincoln Douglas style debate, and the topic was about pornography displayed in public. And I remember my dyslexia kept getting in my way back then, and I kept saying pubic instead of public. But anyway, interesting. That's the same That's the same high school teacher that I had that really appreciated my passion for Brave New World, although I didn't really understand its implications at that point.
the Supreme Court would have the community peek inside the movie theater. Let's assume we have a small town which has 1,000 citizens, 900 of whom are offended by what goes on inside that movie theater, 100 of whom like to go to that movie theater. My approach is that the 100 have sole control over what plays in that movie theater, but the 900 can determine what's exhibited on the marquee, and local community standards should apply there. If the 900 people find nude pictures offensive, then no nude picture should be permitted to play on the outside of that theater. But local community standards have no role to play on what goes on inside the theater. Put it another way, the movie itself is an even more local community than the town, and so long as nobody forces any of the 900 residents to go into that theater, then there is no clash. The rights of privacy, the rights of free expression of everybody are adequately fulfilled.
Good. Carol Rivers?
Well, I'm just gonna have to say that sounds like a point that's counterintuitive to the Christian nationalist ideologies embraced by characters like Doug Wilson and Joel Webben. Hmm. I mean, I can see where they want to be let anyway. If you don't have reference on them, I've got a couple of videos made about them on my YouTube channel. If you go back into the video, into my videos.
Yeah, I had, it was interesting that I had two reactions to the Hustler case, the conviction of the publisher of that particular magazine. My intellectual reaction, which was I took a look at the charges, particularly organized crime charge, and thought they were very flimsy and dangerous and that they could be obviously used against any other kind of publisher at the whim of, say, some local district attorney. My other reaction was sort of sock it to him. That was my emotional reaction. And I think I know where that came from. I'm very much concerned at the flood tide of a sort of new kind of pornography. And that is the pornography that makes female sexuality seem dirty and obscene and grotesque, and that panders to violence against women. And I think there is a clear and present danger in our society. This kind of hostility and violence to women has been there for a long time. It seems to be growing. And I certainly don't blame, the producers of a certain kind of pornography for producing that, but I think they certainly foster and help to maintain that which is there. And this worries me and concerns me greatly.
Well, on the question of Hustler, looking at a recent issue for the purposes of this program and comparing it with such as Playboy and Penthouse, we find that there is all sorts of grotesqueness about Hustler, their headless torsos and that sort of thing.
Well, Bernie,
it is blatant. So one wonders whether there is two things going on at one and the same time. One, the question, is Larry Flint a very successful American capitalist? And second, if we are interested in Larry Flint, are we interested in Hustler or are we interested in the conspiracy theory under which he was convicted, which having less to do with Hustler than general civil liberties? How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm mostly...
Hang on. Before we get into that answer, I'm going to back up 10 seconds. I thought it was interesting how there's this conspiracy theory that Larry Flint was arrested under. I don't have all the details on that story. I'm sure that they're out there somewhere. I know they are out there somewhere. Somebody's worked up a case on him. But yeah. So this should be interesting to hear what Alan has to say in response. Just remember that there's this thing going on too, right? I'll be back to that. I'm not going to read it, but we'll be back to it.
Interested in the conspiracy theory under which he was convicted, which having less to do with Hustler than general civil liberties. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm mostly interested in what Ms. Rivers has just stated, because I think that reasonable sounding plea for censorship is far more dangerous in our society than the know-nothing plea for censorship. After all, what we've just heard is a very reasonable argument why women are offended, and I understand that, by Hustler magazine. Jews are offended by Mein Kampf. Blacks are offended by George Wallace.
Stick a pin in that American Nazi Party thing real quick, all right? And also, remember, this is from 1977, and it's 2026, and how many people do we hear that are railing against the Jews? I have specific issues with the Israeli government.
Every group in our society has another group that it would like to censor. I understand that argument. I would prefer to live in a society where Larry Flint chose not to demean women. I feel very strongly about Larry Flint's demeaning of women and about pornographers' demeaning of women, just as strongly as I feel about anti-Semitic literature and anti-black literature. But were we to try to cleanse our society of all objectionable literature, we would really be moving toward a regime of real censorship. And that's why I find that approach much more dangerous than the know-nothing approach, which says, well, breasts, yes, but other organs of the body, no. Because what Ms. Rivers is conceding is that Larry Flint is really making a political point. Surely she would concede that he was entitled to get up on the witness stand or get up on the podium and make a speech saying, ladies and gentlemen, I think women should be demeaned sexually. They are not entitled to be regarded as equal. They should definitely be subjected to sexual subjugation. Surely she would concede that that kind of a political address is as legitimate as George Wallace's saying similar things about blacks or the American Nazi Party saying it about Jews. The fact that he does it in a representative form by the use of grotesque pictures makes it no more difficult, and we really are arguing now over plain, ordinary political censorship.
But when just to pick up on Carol's point, there was a
Arguing over plain political censorship, and we got cats over there at Flashpoint Media, and people like Joel Webben who want to see Democrats made illegal. They want the Democratic Party disbanded. There was that original AG pick before before Matt Gaetz, that wanted to see Democrat bodies dragged through the streets. How is any of that any different than what Dershowitz was calling out? And yet, as I showed you here, there's that headline right there. All right, going back to this.
an ad in the New York Times. The date is February the 20th, 1977, signed by a lot of eminent people who I think are signing their names on a lot they don't understand. It's called Larry Flint, American Dissenter, and in a sense it contrasts him, or compares him rather, to the dissident writers and artists in the Soviet Union. I wonder whether the discussion of the conviction of Larry Flint as a publisher of Hustler is as important as the conspiracy under which the case was handled. I think there are grounds for Carol Rivers' worries as her political statement, regardless of whether I agree with you about Larry Flint's political. I think he is a hustler. I don't think he's got a political statement in a bushel basket, but nevertheless, I am concerned. I don't think he's a dissident.
I agree with that. I wouldn't sign that ad because
right.
I don't think there's any comparison between what Flint is doing, which is the commercial exploitation of raunch, and what the heroic dissidents in the Soviet Union are doing, which is struggling with their lives on the line for their identity, for their religious freedoms. Nonetheless, to begin to censor...
Struggling with their lives on the line for their, what? Identity and religion. Larry Flint, communist dissidents, fighting for their lives, for their identity. That seems to be a human pattern.
Larry Flint on the ground that Ms. Rivers is suggesting, that is, namely, that he is saying things and doing things that are offensive to women, is an argument with no limiting principle.
I think it's time for Carol to come right back into
this.
Because
I wonder if this argument doesn't mean that you cannot do anything because there's a danger that they would go all the way. In other words, there is no clear and present danger. Society has no interest and no power of regulation, even if, say, we're dealing with child pornography, which is another issue that's coming up. Now, has, for example, society no right to say to the pornographer that they cannot use children, a particularly vulnerable minority, in pornography?
Well, that's a complete red herring. Of course we have the right to tell pornographers that they can't use children. It is against the law. It is a...
Keep that comment in mind as we move forward. Please put a pin in that.
Serious felony for children to engage in sexual relationships, particularly for pay. The action itself, the using of children, is punishable. I don't know a single civil libertarian in this country who would defend the right of a pornographer to exploit children or to exploit anyone else directly in the actions. There is an enormous difference, however,
Except
between
women.
taking...
Women are exploited.
No, I would, and every civil libertarian I know would defend the right of a society to prevent the exploitation of women directly in the making of a pornographic film. For example, if some woman were dragged in and involuntarily subjected, what we're talking about is something very different.
But children aren't dragged in. I mean, the kids, say, who might be using a pornographic movie were clearly not bound in and drugged, and they might voluntarily.
But if you don't understand the difference between a woman of age...
Okay, a child cannot volunteer, for one. Kids can't consent. For two, yeah, sometimes the kidnapping and grape porn is real. Sometimes it's not. Generally, it's not. It's generally presented in a fantasy format. That's obvious when you have the same scene played out by the same players repeatedly. All right. Moving on.
Volunteering to engage in sexual conduct and a child volunteering, then I think you don't understand women's liberation.
No, I
Okay, hang on. Let me back that up 10 seconds.
Between a woman of age.
Dan, I mean, the kids, say, who might be using a pornographic movie were clearly not bound in and drugged, and they might voluntarily.
But if you
make
don't
a
understand the
pornographic film.
difference between a woman of age volunteering to engage in sexual conduct and a child volunteering, then I think you don't understand women's liberation.
No, I get
Oh my goodness, a child can't volunteer. All right, we can see how this is becoming more and more problematic, right?
Because women are people.
No,
they
but-
are just like men. They are entitled to consent. Children are not entitled to
I
consent.
guess what I'm trying to ask you is, obviously, then there
Oh, wait, let me back that up.
But if you don't understand the difference between a woman of age volunteering to engage in sexual conduct and a child volunteering, then I think you don't understand women's liberation.
No, I
because
guess-
women are people.
No,
they
but-
are just like men. They are entitled to consent. Children are not entitled to
I
consent.
guess what I'm trying to ask you is, obviously, then there are some limits you would set. There is a point at which you can say, yes, this should not be done. In other words, you're not absolute to the point where there's hands off on everything. There
I
is
am
a point where you
absolute.
set
No,
limits.
I am absolute on what can be shown, and of course I'm not absolute on what can be done. I would never justify the making of a snuff film if that required the killing of a human being. On the other hand, I would justify the showing of a movie of somebody being killed. If somebody had snuck into the reformatory and had photographed Gilmore being executed, I would defend his right to show that film, just as if there were a society somewhere else in the world where it was perfectly okay for children to engage in sex, and somebody would have photographed those children engaging in sex, I would defend his right to show that film to consenting adults who wanted to watch it as long as nobody was forced to watch it, though I would not defend the right of anybody in the United States to make that kind of a film.
I'd like to
So, is that the reasoning behind defending Jeffrey Epstein doing stuff on Little St. James Island? Because it wasn't in the United States? Get back to this.
turn to the community.
Can I, Bernie,
Yes,
before we do
go
that,
ahead,
let me
Carol.
just quote film critic Molly Haskell. And I think this is relevant here. And she's written, this was about the movie you just talked about, which purported to show a woman being murdered after sexual intercourse. And she said, "When do we hold our ground and say enough? Perhaps it is up to women, for men, our friends, are of the same sex as our abusers and attackers, and rarely seem to understand the special, ever-present nature of our vulnerability, and the degree to which any assault on women in films and plays is a reminder of that vulnerability and a warning."
Well, I see two categories of concern here. I see, Carol, that you have a very real social concern, and that predominates in your view. You see the ultimate objective of society in social, meaningful terms. And Alan Dershowitz, I see you as being primarily concerned from the legal side that if there is a curb, there's no limit to that curb. And you also are setting, I think, a new rule of privacy. Of course, the first major article was by Louis Brandeis and so on, and Warren, but in 1890. But you're talking about something new, I think. You're saying that the community can be the movie theater audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as I hear it, this is novel. Are you suggesting something that might be a new test, the Dershowitz test, that the community is not the geographic nor the political community, but the community of audiences, participating people, the privacy of associations?
Yes, I am. I suggested that test several years ago when I defended the film I Am Curious Yellow, and the court in Massachusetts, the Federal District Court, accepted that argument. It was the first court in the United States to accept the argument that what goes on inside a movie theater is not the business of the society, so long as nobody is forced to see it. I think that's a test that should be adopted by the Supreme Court. There are some states that are moving toward that test. I think the society has a very real interest in protecting those who are offended by this material. But the debate between Ms. Rivers and myself is a much more profound one. You mentioned correctly, she sees things in social terms. Every censoring society in the world sees this problem in social terms. And the corollary, by the way, in every society that I know of which censors, the corollary of the statement, you may not read certain books, is the exact opposite. You must read other books.
One of the interesting things about this discussion.
Now, I find that an interesting point and counterpoint. So I'm gonna bring that to 2026 and ask how we can extrapolate what Alan just said about don't read these books, but do read those books, about in reference to MAGA's banned book list and their pressure to put the God Bless America Bible. Well, that was in Oklahoma, but putting Bibles in general in classrooms and forcing that. I don't know. What do you think?
Is that of the people I know you by reputation, and I know Carol for many years, there are no more outstanding civil libertarians that I could have around the table. And it seems to me that is the nature of the argument now going on. What is the Supreme Court going to do? I have a hunch that the community standards test of Miller versus California has led the country off in directions unanticipated by the 9 grand old men.
I think that's right. I think what the Supreme Court tried to do in Miller was to state, and correctly, that New York should not necessarily impose its values on Wichita, Kansas. But what's happened is the Supreme Court didn't understand the interdependence of the communications industry, of the press, of magazines, of movies.
So could this be the motivation behind Trump and kicking it down to the states? That the federal Supreme Court shouldn't be telling Wichita, Kansas what the hell to do? Oh, good grief. This is actually a little wilder the second time through. I had to proofread it or proof listen to it first so they could line those articles up. But this is second time through. I'm picking up new stuff.
And what resulted is that now Wichita, Kansas can control the reading and viewing habits not only of New York City and Boston, but of London and Paris as well, because any magazine that's produced in this country or any movie that's produced in this country will find its way into Wichita, Kansas. And so we have a lowest common denominator rule, where the most parochial town in the country determines national standards. You can't have local community standards in this country. We are one nation for purposes of the media.
What happens then if you
Now I have to kind of agree with him on that one. Everybody gets something right every now and again, right? But Doug Wilson is wanting to take Moscow, Idaho and make it national. I'm just saying. So there's that.
say that by natural extension of the media, it is to be expected that the mass media now that come into the privacy of one's home, in which we are the community, namely television and radio, there have been some cases on radio and television already, that we can expect the extension of, say, first the Playboy approach, and then the Penthouse approach, and then perhaps the Hustler approach, beginning with cable television and working in reverse. Would you remain an absolutist on this issue under the conditions of general transmission through the airwaves into the private home?
Through the airwaves, no. There are a limited number of airwaves available, and it seems to me the community has the right to make some degree of determination, and children, of course, may sit in front of televisions and flip the channels. I would be an absolutist on cable, however. It seems to me that if somebody wants to introduce into the homes of those people who choose to a pornographic cable station, anybody has the choice to accept it or reject it.
So premium channels like the Playboy channel and Skinamax and so on. All right. That in my opinion is reasonable.
would surely allow.
What happens to the child
I
in
was
that
going to
home?
say I would surely allow at least those families which are all adult families to choose to do that. Now, what if there are children in the home? Justice Frankfurter, in a famous opinion, Winters versus New York, in which New York tried to ban adult books on the ground that children would get access to them, said, look, the reading habits of the adults in this country cannot be determined by our children. The same philosophy, by the way, would prohibit the dissemination of aspirins and other medicines which are dangerous to children, but which adults need. The balance that our society strikes is to require tremendous degree of caution to be exercised to prevent this from getting into the hands of children, but not absolute ban on what adults can do.
You know what I think bothers me most about a lot of the pornography debate, and I think the Larry Flint case is a good example, is that the argument I am making, and I'm not necessarily arguing for censorship because I don't know the answer. I'm looking for, I guess what I'm asking is that my argument be taken really seriously, not that everybody run out and start censoring. But I'm very disturbed that an ad will be taken out in the Times, as we mentioned, in which Larry Flint is made to seem a great a crusader for intellectual freedom, sort of a John Peter Zenger, and it becomes sort of intellectual chic to defend pornography. And often the people who make the argument I make are sort of dismissed as little old ladies in tennis shoes, and this is not a serious argument. And I wonder if there had been a spate of movies, not an isolated movie, but a spate of movies in which, say, sponsored by the White Citizens Council, the KKK, in which black people were systematically lynched, dismembered, and mutilated, would there be the same? Would there be, 35 distinguished literary figures signing an ad in the New York Times defending this material, or would there quickly be ways found for that material to somehow disappear?
I think you've got a good point of issue here. Alan, what do you think?
Well, I think you do have a very good point, and I think there are things that should be done to make it clear that Larry Flint is not to be glorified. What I think he is doing a disgusting thing, and I wish I could limit my defense of civil liberties to those people with whose views I agree. I have to tell you that were the anti-black movie at issue, I would defend the right of that movie to show in theaters. I would not defend the material. I was asked several years ago to defend the American Nazi Party, and I made the line very clear in my discussions with them. Your right to do it is defended, but not the material at issue. And I agree that
That's intriguing. That's intriguing. That's a really curious take, seeing the path they took in his future. I'm just saying, and we're gonna get back to this right here. But let's go back to that.
should be cautious about how the ad reads to make it clear. I think most of the people who signed this Flint ad would agree with you that what Flint is doing is absolutely disgusting, and nobody should defend what he's doing on the merits. Indeed, I think it's very appropriate, by the way, for women's groups, black groups, Jewish groups, you name them, to boycott this kind of periodical, to try to persuade others not to buy it, to try to persuade others to use economic sanctions against the publishers of these magazines. I draw a very sharp distinction, however, between that and the power of the government to say, absolutely, this idea shall not be circulated in the marketplace. Now, the marketplace of ideas, by its very concept, implies the use of economic sanctions and the use of boycotts. The marketplace, after all, if you don't like what's being sold in the market, don't buy it and tell your friends not to buy it. That's the attitude I would take toward Hustler.
Justice Frankfurter, in the middle 50s, in one of these cases, came out with a famous line that it's not necessary to burn the house to roast the pig.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's one, you might call it a test on these issues. Ever since Regina,
I personally think that's a great test. I believe in churches that do good work for their communities and protect their congregants. When it comes to churches that are all about money and don't care about the health and well-being of their people, those are the churches I have issues with. And it doesn't matter the denomination or faith system. I'm using church as a a generalized term from my own vocabulary to represent a faith-based collective. It could be a coven, it could be anything, you know. But anyway,
Gina case of versus Hicklin of the 1860s of Great Britain, we've had tendency to deprave, proximity and degree, clear and present danger, community standard. Is this a ghost hunt? Are we on a search for some test, a magic test, as if there was one? Or is it up to each generation to fight it out and to set the standards for itself?
Well, I think that it is a search for a ghost to try to figure out how one group in a society should determine whether another group in society should read. I think we would all spend our time much more intelligently, and I think we're moving in this direction toward defining what one group can thrust upon another unwilling group. There, I think we can come up with standards. I think
I would agree with that, because I don't want Christian nationalism thrust upon my life.
we can also spend our time advantageously adopting Ms. Rivers' approach, and that is thinking about what kind of material we should encourage in our society. But we should not waste our time thinking about how to define what is inside a book or inside a theater which is subject to governmental banning.
Well, one thing that intrigued me was that the President's Commission on Pornography did a very exhaustive study, and they found that they could find out, or they said that, in effect, that there wasn't a link between, antisocial acts, criminal acts, and pornographic literature. And I think they're right in the individual case. I doubt that you'll find many people reading Hustler, seeing a movie, going out and murdering someone. But what does seem to be happening, and I'm very sensitive to this because I've just been doing some studies on rape, and I notice a number of my female students have been raped. I've just been doing some stories on sexual abuse of women in the marketplace. And I find this climate of hostility is pervasive. It's terribly pervasive. And it's been invisible because these are crimes that tend not to be reported and tend not to be taken seriously. And so that I am looking for ways. I don't like legal censorship, but I certainly am looking for ways to get this particular kind of pornography that breeds this climate of hostility and has, I think, great impact on our social climate. I'm looking for ways maybe to harass it, harness it, get rid of it, and at the same time not tromp all over the First Amendment.
Well, wouldn't it be helpful then to combine your thoughts, Alan Dershowitz and Carol Rivers, if despite your disagreements, by the way, there's a difference between your values, not a disagreement over values, which is another one of the Supreme Court tests. If groups got together and pointed out in a full-page ad what the issues were in this case, or on programs like this, that the issue was the conspiracy theory that goes back to William Penn being arrested on Christchurch Street for meeting with other Quakers, that was used against labor unions and so on and so forth, rather than have the public are not lawyers, the public are not civil libertarian absolutists, the public are worried, or is worried, whichever is grammatically correct. Is there something tangible like that practical people should do when worried about these cases?
Yes, I think it would be very useful for a group of people to put an ad in the paper saying that we oppose the government's right to prevent Flint from publishing, but we equally deplore Flint's judgment in publishing this kind of material. By the way, it wouldn't be limited to pornography. The abuse of women is rampant in other forms of literature as well. The general macho literature that are prevalent in our society today, which is not necessarily
Macho male stuff that was prevalent in the 1970s sounds a lot like the alpha male stuff in the United States in the 2020s. Just saying.
pornographic. Indeed, non-pornographic material probably has a greater impact on perceptions of women and perceptions of blacks and perceptions of other minorities than pornography literature. It's easy to pick on pornography because so many people are opposed to it on moralistic grounds. But if we can separate the moralism and get to some of the really hard issues, I think a coalition could be formed to make both of these points simultaneously.
Carol, do you agree?
I think so, because as I said, what has bothered me so much is that this has not been taken seriously, that we have concentrated on plumbing, in the issue of pornography, what you can show. Can you show below the waist or above the waist? And we haven't concentrated on the attitude toward human beings displayed in this material, and people have not commented on that.
Is this because in the past there was a more cloistered society, and now because of mass media communication and printing millions and millions of issues every week, that sort of thing, there's a generally pervasive nature so that people feel they cannot escape even if they are not participants or interested?
There's that. There's also kind of the Gresham's law of pornography. Every pornographer who goes up to a certain point, you'll get somebody else who's going to go a step further. And every prosecutor who goes up to a certain point and prosecutes, you're going to get an ambitious prosecutor who also is willing to go a step further. So what we're getting is a war of extremes in this area that is very divisive and very dangerous to First Amendment values.
And we're seeing that play out in the 2020s, huh? Interesting. This is wild how history works, isn't it?
And ultimately, it's the persistence of the First Amendment over the facts of the case, the rights and liberties of the people that must be protected. And again, I think it's brought out, sometimes we discuss Larry Flint, even though we may find him personally obnoxious or his product notorious and venomous because of the First Amendment. I want to thank you very much, Alan Dershowitz and Carol Rivers, for what I consider to be one of the few engrossing discussions on this subject that certainly I've participated or heard about in a long time. We didn't resolve any of the issues, and that's as it should be, because the First Amendment doesn't say that three people can get together and settle something. So once again, my thanks. This is Bernard Rubin saying good night.
And that is exactly why I wanted to share that conversation with you. This is the kind of video that can pop up when a listener or a listener makes a comment, because I'm ready to jump on it. If you can give me evidence that can help build my case with verifiable facts, I'm all over it. And how can you get better facts than actually listening to the words falling out of somebody's mouth? Like in this clip. All right, so what's this referencing? This is from this article over here. Epstein lawyer responds to Elon Musk claim Trump is named in files, and then there's that. So there's this video right here. Let's just check this out.
Context around why you were mentioned.
I was mentioned for two reasons. One, I was Epstein's.
Context around why you were mentioned.
I was mentioned for two reasons. One, I was Epstein's lawyer, and of course I flew in his airplane with his legal team to legal meetings in Florida with the U.S. attorney, with the state attorney, so I was frequently with Epstein as a client. Also, I was falsely accused by a woman who eventually admitted that she may have confused me with somebody else, may have been a case of mistaken identification. But as far as I can tell, and I haven't read every word, the recently released papers just include the accusation against me without the statement by the woman that she now realizes that she may have misidentified me. So there's a problem of selective leaking or unsealing of material. I have been an advocate of unsealing everything, every word, because I want not only the accusation to be unsealed, but the admission that she may have confused me with someone else to be revealed. And that's probably true of other people as well. The judge did not include a lot of material that would be exculpatory and that would raise questions about the credibility of of some of the accusers. So I'm hoping that all of the information will come out. I have nothing to hide. That's why I was one of those who pushed right from the beginning to have every document revealed.
So to clarify, the Jane Doe Free, we're talking about Virginia Joffrey, who has been quite publicly accusing several people, but very high profile victim in the case. Is she the Jane Doe 3 who's allegedly forced to have sexual relations with you, according to the court documents? Is that essentially Virginia Joffrey? I mean, I'm trying to get some sense as to clarifying what's in here and what's not.
I assume so. That's the accusation. She originally accused me of having sex with her, and then she admitted that she may have confused me with someone else. And if you look at all the evidence in the case,
She also wound up dead after writing a note that she would not kill herself. So there's that too.
it proves conclusively that it couldn't possibly have been me, as I've said from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And so she has confirmed that with her statement that she may have confused me. And of course, the other evidence that so far hasn't been revealed would prove it conclusively. That's why I want everything revealed. The public is now getting half truths, not whole truths.
So,
And it's still that. It's still that. Okay, this is January 2024. This is 2.5 years ago. And we're still dealing with this issue.
just again to sort of set the record straight, did you ever associate with Jeffrey Epstein in any capacity other than as his lawyer?
Yes, before he was ever involved in anything, he came to Harvard. He had an office in Harvard. I met with him at his office, went to seminars with the president of Harvard, with Nobel Prize scientists. That was a common thing, but I never saw a young person ever with Jeffrey Epstein. He managed to hide his private, allegedly criminal life from everybody. So I never...
Wait. I remember you admitting that you got a massage while at Epstein's place, but you left your underwear on. So I'm not buying that answer, man. I'm just not.
did anything improper with him. And once it was revealed what his secret was, I stopped and totally terminated my private relationship with him. Took his phone calls as his lawyer, but never had a personal relationship with him thereafter.
What do you make? Do you have any opinions on the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell? Was she fairly convicted?
I don't think it was a fair conviction. I don't think she had a fair trial. It's on appeal. I hope she'll win the appeal. My wife and I have known her. We knew her as Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend early on, and I never saw her do anything that was improper. But let's wait and see what all the evidence turns out. Partial disclosure of evidence is a half-truth, and a half-truth is a lie.
Yeah, a half-truth is a lie. And we get those on the regular, don't we? Anyway, you'll notice a couple of blends in there. I had a couple of technical issues along the way, but we made it through, didn't we? Or I did. I don't know if you made it through, but if you did and you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel, and feel free to share this video with anybody you think it might help. Again, this is the kind of thing that can pop up when a listener throws me a bone. And I'm definitely going to chew on it. I am that digger. Anyway, please take care of yourself so you can help take care of others. Get the rest that you need. Drink plenty of fluids. And remember, please remember, mental health does matter.
Everybody wants to